Can you hear me? Good. Okay. For those who don't know me, there are some in here who do. I'm McDonald. I will be the candidate for Corby and East Northamptonshire. For those of you who aren't local, that's right at the top of the county. It's a long way away. It's a strange shape, our county. A bit about myself. I moved here with my family in 1976 when my father left the army, and we settled out in the Eastern District. So I had an interesting upbringing. But like most people, I went to school locally, state school. I went to Lings Upper School, and I went to local schools, and I worked in the local shops. I had a paper round at 13, and I haven't stopped working. I did retire a few years ago. My wife doesn't really understand that, so she keeps giving me jobs. Basically, I'm no different than those people who are sitting here. I have the same wants, the same needs. I've probably got the same experiences, whether they be working or domestically. All four of my children have gone to school and been successful going to school at a state school in Corby. In 1986, I joined the Northamptonshire Police. I retired 30 years later, and not only did I live in Kingsthorpe, in fact I lived for a fair few years, about 100 yards from here, and I policed this area. In fact, I run either the sector policing team, and I also run a proactive crime team targeting drug dealers. In fact, I'm quite sure that there's a fair few people here who still remember my gentle knocks in the early hours. In fact, I was still dealing with some of their grandkids when I retired. I'm going to talk about policing. I gave 30 years of my life to policing and one marriage, and it does hold a place in my heart. I do always back the blue when I can. That thin blue line is basically what keeps us safe from hell. The boys and the girls who actually police do a very good job when they can. Unfortunately, they're let down by their police leadership, and more importantly, the politicians who are supposed to be helping us. If I look back at policing, I think the big change in how I personally felt policing deteriorate would have been under Tony Blair's government. And he has a lot to answer for, him and his government. Basically, the first thing they brought in, which really impacted upon two areas of policing, which were close to my heart, was covert policing. So I ran a drug team then. When he brought the Human Rights Act in, it basically turned it round, and we had to account for all our actions and mitigate against impacting upon people's private life, namely the drug dealers' families. At no time was society interested in the drug dealers and the fact that if they weren't a drug dealer, we wouldn't be kicking their doors in. But we had to account for how we did for it. The second was how we dealt with criminals, mainly criminals acting. So an example I would give is if little Johnny's on a stolen motorcycle, and he falls off while being pursued by the police, nobody said it was his fault. He shouldn't have stolen the bike. Well, we all did. But the people with the loudest voices always asked the police, why were you chasing him? Why did you knock him off the bike? If you hadn't chased him, he wouldn't have fallen off and he wouldn't have broke his leg. Speaking from personal experience here. So, but no one actually said if he hadn't stolen the bike, if he'd pulled over, he wouldn't now be in hospital with a fractured leg. They always got to think. The next thing he brought in was the crime recording standards, which doesn't mean much to anybody because they always keep quiet about it. But basically, anyone who alleges a crime, the police have to record it. And not only do they have to record it, they've got to have some investigative process throughout, even if it's not a crime. So there are laws that say certain things are crimes, certain things aren't. If they come along and tell you something, you have to record it as a crime and investigate it. Even if at the end you'll turn around and say it's not a crime because this is a lawful excuse, for example. And anyone who's had anything to do with bureaucracy knows damn well that once a piece of paper is created, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and it grows. So what should just be a simple thing of they're alleging this, we've now got this huge investigation trail, including investigating people as though it was actually a crime. We had to go on. The other part of it was that many people would tell us crime, report crimes, but they don't actually want anything to happen. For a variety of reasons. They want to tell us about problems with their neighbours, fights they've had in the street. We had to do it. So if you think of your classic Friday, Saturday punch-up, in my day, when I first started, you'd stop it, you'd dust them down, And as long as they weren't too badly injured, you'd give them words of advice and tell them to go home. Because they're quite happy, they don't want, they've been out, they've had a beer, they've had a puncher, and now they're going home. Once they brought this act in, we had to record the assaults, even though they didn't want to record it, and we'd have ended up locking them up. So then the whole process, a big massive amount of paperwork, and some of those would actually be convicted of crimes that the other chaps didn't want to prosecute, or they'd end up with cautions for public order offences. So it just both of these things create so much paperwork, or still do create a lot of paperwork for the police, which then takes us off the streets. Really ridiculous piece of legislation, both brought in, I would suggest, with good intentions, but they hadn't actually spoken to anyone who actually is at the sharp end, and all the subsequent feedback is ignored, because no, they never change anything. So as a result of this, we basically have individuals today who aren't afraid of the law. Criminals. We see ample things on TikTok and everything on our Facebook feeds. They're not afraid of the law. They're not afraid of being arrested. They're not afraid of going to court. And more importantly, they're not afraid of going to prison. I don't actually know what you have to do nowadays to go to prison, because people are waving knives around, they're stabbing people, and they don't go to prison for that. So basically, successive governments, certainly over the last 20, 30 years, they've gone soft on crime. And because of that, we no longer feel safe in our streets. We no longer feel safe in our homes. And though the criminals don't fear the law, we, the normal member of the public, do. Because if we get involved and we have a go and do what we think is right, we run the risk of being stabbed. Because they're carrying knives. The amount of people who carry weapons is horrendous to think about. But in addition to that, we've also got the fact that the police may well then turn up in your doorstep to arrest you for using what they call, or what someone calls, excessive force. Despite the fact that you're fighting with someone and you're frightened. So you've then got to go through all this process, and you may well even be prosecuted at the end of it, which discourages people from getting involved. Personally, I didn't want to be a politician. I'd much rather have sat at home and tried to avoid my wife giving me tasks. But looking at the news and seeing the country as I walk and drive about it, I felt compelled to actually stand up. I've served the country once, I serve it again. And why? Because I've got grandkids, and I really would like them to have the kind of life that I had, not the world I think that's coming. So what a reform we're going to do in relation to policing. First of all, one-handed, I'm going to turn over my sheets of paper. I'm going to do lots. First of all, we're going to increase police numbers by 40,000. That's a huge number, but that's over 5 years. It will be a challenging task because not everyone can be a copper. And even those people who join, the wastage in policing, nursing, and the medical professions are huge. It's because those jobs are not for everybody. So we've got a lot of vetting to do to make sure that the right people are actually accepted, and also we have to make sure that those people who are going to get in are actually the right type of people. So we look around and we say, okay, who's going to be good? Well, of course, first of all, you have to have no criminal record, which is a bit of a stopper for some of us. But we've got a lot of people out there with vast life experience skills who would make ideal cops. They're not going to be superintendents or chief constables, but they're going to be the guys who are going to sort out your domestic and deal with a fight on a Friday and Saturday night and keep everybody safe. Now, these people are veterans. I've worked with many veterans, and they make excellent bobbies. Not only do they have life skills, they've got something about them, they've got confidence, and most importantly, they're ready to get stuck in. They're not sitting in the car crying because somebody shouted at them. Okay? As I said, it's not a job for everybody. You do have to get stuck in. And I used to say, I can remember saying to a young officer of mine, I don't expect you to be Bruce Lee. All I expect you to do is to hold on until more hairy-ass coppers can turn up, and then they'll deal with the violent prisoner. Okay, Sarge, fine. And that's it. But also, because they've gone down the road of recruiting graduates, we've got very young people, very cosseted people joining the police force. And I joined at 20, and in hindsight, it was far too young. I would go to domestics, and people would say to me, "You're not even shaving. How can you tell me about my domestic?" And I'd say, "Well, I don't need to know about your domestic. I'm just telling you about the law." So it becomes black and white. And that's probably the worst type of policing, because the world is full of shades of grey, and you only gain that with experience. So we've got a lot of people out there who are very experienced, who didn't choose policing when they were younger, for a whole variety of reasons, but they want to choose it now. So these mature people with life experiences can come in. Also, we're going to look at zero tolerance. It's bandied about a lot, this word, but basically it means cracking down on every misdemeanour. This would involve a lot of resources put into the justice system so that the people that are arrested and are processed actually go to court quickly. And what we're saying is, let's not be soft on crime, let's be hard on crime. I'm going to put hard on the criminals, because they're making those choices. So, if you're caught in a public place with a sharply bladed weapon, a knife in other words, you're going to prison. No ifs, no buts. Okay? If you're dealing drugs, go to prison. Simples. So you don't have to be rocket science to understand that. And also we've got to increase stop and search. Yeah, the usual people will shout off about it all, but it works. I've used stop and search. It's a very effective tool. You know, if people, it's the same when we go into other types of things, like you're going to put more bobbies back on the beat. So we're going to increase 40,000, but they're not going to sit in offices. Some have to sit in offices because there's a lot of work that goes on behind computer desks and because of the different type of challenges faced today. But actually, if you're out and about walking and talking to people, you know what's going on. You know, I can remember the old sweats telling me as a young, wet behind the ears copper, basically, you're a good bobby if you don't take your pen out your bag. You deal with it all, but you're not locking people up. You're just keeping a lid on the thing and maintaining your primary function, which is keeping the peace. You know everything, you know everyone that's going on, and more importantly, they know that you know. Okay, so we're going to recruit more officers, we're going to get more experienced people in there in relation to life skills, and we're going to have people walking the beat. Okay, and also we're going to come back to common sense. This theme runs throughout the whole programme for reform. We're going to have common sense policing. And what that means is we're going to actually target actual criminality, not perceived crime, not hurty feelings. Yes, if it's a place for some of them, but we have to use our common sense about it. If it's a crime, we'll investigate it. If it's not a crime, well, it's not for the police to be sorting out. Police and Crime Commissioner. We've recently had an election here. Basically, Reform don't agree with them. It's too political, and politicians shouldn't have direct control over the policing of where we live. It should be down to the Chief Constable. Excuse an R1 at the minute, but that's a little joke for us. So basically, but we don't want politicians getting too directly involved. We used to have police authorities before, which was a band, and they worked very well locally, very supportive, cross-border and cross-party support from them. Okay, so basically, we've got a few ideas for policing. It isn't rocket science. Basically, you don't have to have a super brain to be a copper. You know, I can say, speak to myself, I've only got O-levels. Okay? You just have to have common sense and basically understanding of people and their problems. And more importantly, you've got to have the courage to stand up and, you know, put yourself in the way. Because without it, you might as well not have the police. Just drive around in your cars and don't talk to people. So basically, if you're seeking real change in the country, more money in your pocket, prompt medical attention, increased investment in your infrastructure and our industries and our people, and if you want cheaper energy, along with fuel and food security, then reforms policies provide this. The challenges that face us are many, and doing the same revolving door sort of political voting system, as already alluded to by the colleague before me, it's almost like the Chuckle Brothers, you know, to me to you, and they're just the same party, different colour. Or as more eloquently put, they're basically two cheeks of the same backside. That's just what makes me titter. Okay? So why vote for the same things that have failed repeatedly? You know, we might as well give reform a chance. We can't do a worse job than is already there. And as we've already said, we're not politicians. You know, we're not career politicians. We're just people who've had enough. And we want to change something about it to make a better Britain. That's all. So I would just ask you to vote for us and give us a go. Okay, thank you.